Okay? The book speaks to the infamous school-to-prison pipeline. What is that? What's the school-to-prison pipeline? When people say that, what are they really talking about? What are they talking about? Yeah?
Something we talked about earlier in the semester about schools sort of tailor education for most black boys or whatever to outcast them to the point where they don't get the grades they want or they don't get motivation they need for the classes.
Okay. Anybody want to help out? Contribute. Yeah, Mr. McComb. Mr. McComb.
I took it as the school system is how the school system sometimes, maybe not necessarily in the classroom, but over criminalizing in that context. So already set certain expectations for them over punishing them in school to the point in which, you know, they're suspended all out of time, themselves, or something like that. And then that will ultimately lead to.
Absolutely. So definitely, both are right in complicated ways, this broad way, right? There's no one answer. But the argument that's being made by Ferguson and all is that the very treatment and attitudes of teachers, black, white, and indifferent now, right? So it's not just a white thing at this point. And as we can see, particularly if you're reading Ferguson here, definitely represented in my data, in my study, black boys think black teachers anyway are racist anyway. They're just as racist as the white ones. And they're not referring to conservative scholars here, right? This is the choir that's being critiqued here. These are the liberal folk. These are the folk who got it. These are the friends of the community. These are the ones that understand that the black boys are responding to and that Ferguson's ultimately writing about. She's talking, they're talking to us. I can't be no more clear. They're not talking to George Bush's friends here. They're talking to people like you and me. And they're saying, we don't get it. All right, so I think that's very powerful. That's very powerful. But getting back to the school-to-prison pipeline, ultimately was being argued either by Ferguson and others, and this argument, because it's so big and it means so much, and it can be taken from different perspectives. But ultimately what's being argued here is that the experiences inside schools, particularly these large, public schools, low-income schools with very little resources in these inner-city communities, that these schools and the treatments in particular, perhaps of all of its students, but definitely its low-income students of color, in our case, black male students or black boys, their very treatment inside the schools are conditioning them, ultimately training them, preparing them for one thing, street life, and ultimately prisons. There is nothing else that there's no other level of capital, intellectual, social, or educational, or any other forms of capital that they will walk out of here with that will prepare them for anything else. So indicators for the school-to-prison pipeline are things like definitely school suspensions, or school expulsions, or within school disciplinary practices like in-school suspension, or school detention, or whatever else, right? Those particular experiences over time and space will condition black boys to be one thing by the time if they graduate from high school. And that's street identified. Yes, Ms. Malone?
What about like special education programs?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they're at the heart of all of this right here. She definitely brings that up. Preparing young black boys for the streets. Yeah, Mr. Brown.
I say a lot of schools say they don't do it, or obviously deny it because it's illegal.
Absolutely, it's illegal.
I mean, the track system and everything, and how they do stuff. I mean, I remember when I came in high school, they tried to put me on the tech course, the tech track or whatever. Yeah. And it wasn't the college. Preparatory track or the list of classes that prepare you for college. And I remember my mom had to come down to the school and straighten everything out. I mean, I didn't really know it. It didn't make any sense to me why I would be on the track anyway. I was in beta club in middle school, so it didn't make any sense later.
And this is a long time ago, but this is all right. Generally, folk are tracked by grade 4. That's generally when most folk are tracked. And what we found out, there's a lot of tracking research that's out there. Most students are tracked, and for the most part, once you are tracked, it's very hard to get out of that track. Most folks don't even realize that they were tracked. They don't realize what's going on behind the scenes. But in any event, you're tracked. I was always tracked in AP, you know, and it worked to my benefit. So I've always been in AP honors classes, where my brothers were always tracked for, like, you know, special ed, or I think I have 3 older brothers. One of them maybe did mainstream, but I'm not even sure. But in any event, they didn't necessarily do good in school. But they were tracked early on. I remember my father coming down, particularly with my other brother, El Hodge, who was in special ed, and they really did not want to release him from special ed. In part, he said, because it helped them, but more than likely, they received more dollars on those students, so they kept them placed, and they couldn't afford to let the El Hodges go. So that's pretty common. It's pretty common. Yep. Yep.
You wouldn't think that the parents have anything to do with it, though? The way children act in school?
That's a question, or are you making a mistake?
That's a question.
I think it's complicated. I think definitely when you think about the school to prison pipeline, definitely the children are bringing stuff inside the school, whether that's psychological, emotional, or
I
other
only
stuff.
say that because my mother teaches special ed, and, you know, I know she has to be rough. You know, because, I mean, you know,
She got to, huh?
students will walk all over her. Yeah, so.
I feel you.
I mean, she could be tough, though. He just say about her. Like, my stepmom's a special ed teacher, but, like, she tries to get people out of the special ed track because she's like, these kids are smart, and, like, the teachers just throw them in my classroom because they're disruptive in class, or they do this and they do that, and rather than actually teach or be a teacher or inflict some kind of discipline on them, they send them to special ed, and then that's what they do. And they're like, the athletes get sent to special ed, so they get all good grades, and then they can go to college. Like, the principal will come in and be like, we want this due to whatever, and, like,
I will say this. I don't to say that all the teachers are bad, or all special ed teachers are bad, or all are good. It's too oversimplified, right? To say that they aren't doing anything, that they're just passive victims, meaning the students coming in and just being whatever, that's not true neither, right? So it's a complicated mix of it all, and there is some accountability, right? Their students need to be held accountable for all behavior. I will say this though, and this is definitely not challenging anybody. You know, I'm not necessarily. I do a lot of urban education research, so maybe I'll have some opportunity to show you some of the data from my study. But in any event, I'm not. I don't think teachers would consider me to be a good friend of theirs. I'm not. We don't necessarily get along. We don't share the same philosophy. We have enough research that is out there, overwhelmingly so, where we do know this, and Ferguson doesn't bring this up in her reading, that teacher expectation, right? Definitely Claude Steele's work. I just came out with an article with him. He's a pretty big scholar out in Stanford. He does a pretty popular theory called stereotype threat. Right? So stereotype theory, teacher expectation theory, among a million other theories. All that says is this: whatever the person in charge thinks of you is how you're going to produce. Period. Right? So that means what? So in these studies, this is what we do. We bring in a black professor in, or a black teacher instructor like myself, in front of black students, and we ask them to perform an educational intellectual task. But in this task, I think you can do it. Right? Then we'll bring in a white person, same role, but we just switched up the experimental condition, and with the experimental condition, the white person doesn't necessarily think you can do it in front of black students. And project in and project out, what we find is when the teacher actually believes in the students, they perform better. Right? We haven't got to it yet, but let me talk about it now because I think it's relevant.